No matter how disgusting looking those spiders are, I have to catch them and take them outside. But if you've got 20 ants crawling around your table, well, now you're under attack, okay? And we often have to have an immediate reaction. So it is exactly this way when you think about it. I'm dealing with something small or I'm dealing with something big. That changes really directly the course of your life and what would happen to you. Let's talk about the brain a little bit, okay, when it comes to drug use. There Before we talk about something called the reward system, which is strongly affected by drug use, and the effect of substances in the brain is quite strong when it comes to the reward mechanism. Let's just do a little review about the brain again. So we know that certain parts of the brain govern specific functions and predominantly relate to certain functions in the brain. For example, we have the parietal lobe right over here, where it's responsible for sensory information, for motor functioning, for how those integrate in your lifetime. Then we talked already before about the frontal lobe, which is sort of like the CEO of your brain, which is collecting all this information around you and from all the other lobes of your brain and brings it forward to make decisions, sound decisions, and also to control emotions. And you may have a thought, but you may not produce that thought based on your environment. That inhibition of emotion and control of that and appropriate production of speech, that's related to the frontal lobe. Then we've got the temporal lobe, which is those like little memory pads, almost like if you imagine the CEO walking down the company and analyzing the company. I've got those two memory pads. Those secretaries are walking down and writing everything down. That's your memory. That's your temporal lobes. Okay. And then you have the baccalobe, which is not a name. It's the occipital region, but I like to call it the baccalobe because it makes sense. It's right there in the back, and that one is responsible for processing visual information. So we take some visual information that we see, it flips it over, and then it makes sense out of it, and it uses the other lobes to understand it. And even though we've got the distinction of all of those lobes, we should really know that the processing in the brain is not often targeted to just one area, but it's using many areas of your brain. Your brain is working like a company, and every different parts of your brain, they have those little, the customer service has sometimes to call to the business office, and the business office has to call quality assurance, and that's, your brain is working like a company, so it doesn't work, those regions don't work in complete isolation. Okay? Why that's important, your cerebellum right down here, for example, is responsible for coordination, and your cerebellum can be affected by drug use as well. And sometimes you'll see people lose balance and coordination that relates to that as well. Substance abuse affects your hippocampus. The hippo who did not know where the campus was. That's the way for me to remember the memory area. But those areas are responsible for memory. Those are affected also by drug use. Now the brain, your whole brain is functioning with something called nerve cells, okay, or neurons that are traveling are located in certain areas of the brain or traveling through areas of the brain through those pathways, and they send information and integrate information. And so when you think about it, it's almost like having like a FedEx being sent this way and being sent that way, right? And so it's quite of an active process in your brain, and everything you may have a thought during the day or even produce a joke, something that has to do with humor. Even humor is processed in the brain in a quite of an amazing way, and so it is quite telling about certain people's talents. And there is some suggestion also even that humor is hereditary. So you'll notice that a certain kind of humor and certain kind of people, they have a certain style to them. And I see it in a more fascinating way in my son. So the only thing that my son probably got from me is my eyes. But everything else, he looks a lot like his grandpa. And in so many ways he's like his grandpa. Okay, his sense of humor, the way his body is, the way he thinks about things, the analytical way of thinking, and it's quite fascinating to be able to see how there's some hereditary factor that travels, there's some genetic component that travels from one generation to another, and may or may not be expressed, that potential may or may not be expressed the same way in the person's life, but definitely there are identifying factors. So when we go back to the brain and we talk about pathways, we can talk about the one of the main pathways that is being involved in substance abuse, which is the reward pathway. It's got a lot of the reward pathway has got a lot of terminology that I don't want to go into, and I'll bore you to death, and you'll never remember. And a lot of those words that sounds like I'm talking about something 1,000 years ago. So I'm not going to be saying like nucleus accumbens and but the reward system in general works in the way almost that you would think about how a child gets rewarded, and actually even adults, but that's another discussion, for their work and the things that they do. Okay, so for example, let's say that you make a deal with your child, and if they eat their food, okay, they eat their dinner. There's something called the Premack effect in psychology, where if you really want your kid to eat broccoli, this is what I do, by the way, with my kids. If you really want your kid to eat broccoli, but you know broccoli is like intimidating for children, you'd say, hey, if you eat this steamed broccoli, I'm going to give you a chocolate cookie, okay, at the end of your meal. Well, now you're pairing something very undesirable with something really desirable. So you know that the kid looks at the cookie, wants the cookie, and is thinking, oh gosh, I really want to eat that cookie, but you gotta eat the broccoli. So guess what they would do at the end? Most likely, most kids shove up the broccoli right up their mouth, get it over with, so they could win the prize, which is the cookie. So if you give them one cookie every time that they eat their vegetables, just so you want their taste buds to get used to vegetables and have the experience and have the nutrients, the kid knows every time they eat those vegetables, they get the cookie. No biggie. They learned actually a good lesson, which is if I get my work done, if I do my part, I'm going to get a reward at the end. And most vast majority of things that you're going to do in your life, you're going to do them because of one reward or another. Okay? But now think about drug use. Okay? Drug use is like saying, hey, why have one cookie? Okay? So after I leave the house and leave my kids with the babysitter after they ate dinner, the babysitter comes over, and she's a very bad babysitter because she goes to the kitchen and said, hey, why eat one cookie when you can eat a jar of cookies? And she pulls out a jar of cookies and she says to my kid, hey, don't tell anyone, but I'll let you eat all the cookies in the jar. So now my kid with the babysitter, they're sitting down, they're having a great time because they're eating the jar of cookies, they're finishing all the cookies. My kid's brain is firing up with all this sugar, and if it's chocolate, with the caffeine, and my kid loves having all these great cookies. Now let's say that I have this babysitter 3 nights in a row because I have something that I have to do at work, and every day, the babysitter comes over and she pulls out a jar of cookies, so my kid won't complain. I'll be very happy. Now, babysitter's gone, and I'm introducing again the day after the concept of broccoli with one cookie. And I show my kid the cookie and I say, and I have no knowledge of what has happened with the babysitter. And I say, hey, if you eat this broccoli, I'm going to give you this cookie. And my kid looks at the cookie and goes, what? One cookie? What's one cookie for? I don't want one cookie. It's nothing. So my kid is not happy, no longer happy with one cookie. My kid wants a jar of cookies, and nothing is going to make it for him unless he gets the jar of cookies. If I can make it all sense of this example, and I hope you're getting what I'm saying, is my kid now has been trained, has been developing a certain expectancy, both physiological and cognitive expectancy, that he would only feel rewarded and happy and satisfied with a jar of cookies. One cookie is not going to cut it. Okay? So this is what drugs do to you in one way in the reward system. When certain neurotransmitters in the brain, they get exposed to so much excitement, to so many cookies. Now, when you want to take all these cookies away and say, hey, let me give you one cookie at the time, which is what happens with dopamine in the brain. We'll talk about that further. I'll give you one cookie at the time. The brain is saying, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. My kid may even be depressed now because he can only get one cookie. So my kid now feels deprived. Hey, what happened to all the cookies? My kid is no longer happy and satisfied with one cookie. That's what happens to your brain with drugs. You are no longer happy with that one cookie, okay, with that one dose of excitement. With that thought, we're going to take a little break and go into a song and come back to discuss the kind of neurotransmitters that are involved in the brain and why are they producing way too many cookies. Bye.
Whoa, hey, whoa. I've been waiting on the sunset, bills on my mindset. I can't deny it, getting high.